Time to dig in. Announcements. The exams will eventually be graded. I don't yet know when. Try to do a week's turnaround where possible. So I'll see if I can make that happen. We will have a new assignment posted hopefully today. If not, you know exactly what it is. It's the exact same assignment as the last few over the next 3 chapters. How is that going now that we're 9 chapters in? How do we feel about the book in Unity? Any feedback on how the homeworks feel? And if you feel like you're learning, if you feel like you're getting prepared to make games next quarter?
I really like the book. I think it does a good job of explaining and kind of giving you that intuition as to what to do.
There's a lot of terminology in the book, which is cool too, because like even for people that have used Unity before, like you know that the thing does the thing, but you don't know why. And it kind of goes into the why a little bit.
Yeah, that is nice. I find the book to be just about the perfect difficulty and walkthrough, but it's very clear. I tend to get really good feedback on the book. So I'm especially interested if you don't like the book for some reason. I'm curious to know why. Just because all I hear are good things about it. So I want to have the data of if you don't like it, why don't you like it? And that way, that helps me to be able to find supplementary materials or anything else that works for people who don't like a particular kind of material. So if that's the case.
I think it's pretty good for the most part, but I feel like chapters 7 and 8 could have been combined.
Yeah.
Because it started with, I thought it was kind of funny. It started chapter 7 saying, if you know, or if you're not familiar with programming, you may want to, whatever it said, go do something else or read before you do this chapter. And then proceeded to explain things that anyone who's done any amount of programming at all should already know.
Yeah. The programming chapters are very basic.
I think it's just a little outdated.
Yeah.
That's probably about it.
Every single day, almost, at least once a week, I'm looking for, is a 5th edition coming? Is a 5th edition coming? I know it's outdated. It's
The new input system is completely different.
Yeah.
You have to go like
Yeah.
back the old one, which I did that. But
Yeah.
I could follow the book, but
Yeah.
Something that may or may not be related to that, I noticed that with the, I ran into issues with it being unable to load the tree textures. Like I could see that they were there and I could see that it was loading the models, but when it was actually drawing them on the scene, they were all in magenta.
Oh, that's a classic Unity thing though. You just have to reselect it, like turn it to something else, turn it back.
Oh,
It's so funny. It's very buggy.
Turn it off and turn it back on.
Unity is the Visual Studio, not the Visual Studio Code of horribly bloated and it's still bug ridden. No, I prefer almost everything to Unity, just like I prefer almost anything to straight Visual Studio. Any other feedback? Any other thoughts on that? Just because it's all happening outside of my knowledge and control, so it's good for me to check in every once in a while on how that is going, just to make sure that I have a handle on it. All right. Back into our analysis part of the class, we are going through testing. Interesting. Version of Unity book once doesn't work on particular Arch installs. Newer version did, but you have to adapt to that. That makes sense. A new edition would be great. I really would love a new edition of this book. First part of this week, we're going to be finishing testing and going into a bit of game balance intro. And as soon as we get to that point, there is a larger section of this class that is implementing and doing things. So by the later part of this week, we're going to be back experimenting, playing around with things, having in-class activities. So it is coming. It is on the horizon. And then we spend most of the rest of the class at least having something on the side that we are doing and collecting data on and analyzing as we do it. So let's get through this and we'll get to that and it will be much more fun. So we were talking about the circle of playtesters and the first circle was you. What kinds of testing are you good at? What testing should you be doing? We talked about how whenever you launch the game, even from within Unity, you're acting as a playtester. So think from the perspective of a playtester while you're doing that. But eventually you do need other people's input because you are biased. You know the reasoning behind every system. You made it for a reason. You're probably fairly good at the control scheme. You set it because it's something that you're familiar with or something that you wanted in the first place. And you know the underlying math and balance and decisions that can be made. So you don't have a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh brain on your game. You need other people to provide that kind of feedback. So second circle are either other developers or trusted friends, people who you know well. So the point where you want to expand this beyond just you to this second circle is once the game starts feeling like what you anticipated it feeling like. However, that's a vague statement, but it's vague because it really depends on the game itself, the genre, how complex it is. In order to get that feeling to that point, you have to have put in enough development to where the emergence from the mechanics that you've inscribed begin to take effect. Best playtesters that you can find in this level are somehow in your target audience or in the game dev community, someone who has a bit more technical understanding of what's going on behind the scenes or underneath the code, or in your target audience, the people who will eventually be playing this game. So the extent to which you can identify which of your closer friends fit that prescription, you'll get better feedback from them. But depending on how wide you want to target this game, it might be useful to find some people for whom it's not your target audience and see how intuitive it is. So if you get playtesting from the target audience, they'll give you feedback from the perspective of eventual players of your game, the future players of your game, which is the exact kind of feedback that you want. And developers themselves give good technical feedback so they can help you to maybe if you have a scalability issue, they could help you understand the technical limitations and prod you in a direction that might help you to make your code more efficient, allow you to put more stuff on the screen. They may also give you some good ideas outside of the scope of your game that maybe you're worth considering being part of your game because they go well together, or they have some experience with this. It's something you hadn't thought of. And many very bad bugs will be found by this group of people because this is the first time someone outside of you and your biases are looking at your games, and they're going to find the worst bugs, the funniest bugs, the bugs that should have been caught but weren't. So it's exciting because it's the first time someone who didn't make the game is playing it, but also it has the bugs of that level as well. So they'll find bugs in places you just didn't think to look, because they will have a very different approach to the game than you would as the developer. As someone who plays the game in a certain way, you're going to try some things and not try some other things, or just not even be aware that that's something that could be tried. So it will find bugs when someone tries that for the first time. If it's an online game, it's a great chance to really test the server connections. You're not necessarily testing for bottlenecks because not very many people are connected to the server at a time unless you are actively creating instances and trying to attach those instances yourself to the server to test that. But it will test things like server stability and ping times, things like that. For an average user when the server is not near its cap or bottleneck. Question?
If you're thinking in terms of like hard lines from these circles, if you're in a team environment, then you're having someone else on the team testing something that you're working on, like still part of the development team, but still in the first circle.
It's closer to the U, but it depends on exactly what their role is on the team. If their role is active development on the game, then probably it's more like you, but if it's someone who's who's a network engineer who hasn't been actively playing the game, but is setting up something in the back end or something for the game, but they haven't actively played the game, then it's probably closer to the second level. Maybe they've heard some ideas about the game, but they don't know the exact technical details behind the game, so they make for a better friend because they didn't spend active time developing the game. It's a great question, though. All right, tissue playtesters. This is when you give your playtesters a game that is so bad that they cry, they have to cry. Not actually. A real tissue playtester is someone who's brought in to play the game a single time. They come in, they play the game, and then they leave. And that approximates, to the best of our ability at this stage, someone who would eventually play the game for the first time to get that first player experience. And this is important because someone who playtests this game can only try it for the first time once. After that, they've learned some things. They bring their experiences from that first time into their second time, into their third time. So if you bring back the same set of trusted friends to playtest your game over and over again, they're never getting that first playtest experience as you would from what is a tissue playtester. So this is incredibly important for testing because at each stage you go make some changes. It's going to change what it's like to engage with your game for the first time. So something like the tutorial system. You make some changes to the tutorial system, but the playtesters you've been using have already understood the game to the point where they don't need the tutorial anymore. Is their feedback on the tutorial going to be as valuable? Probably not. They already understand the game's mechanics. So what did the changes to the tutorial system and what did that actually do for new players? You need to bring in new players to get an understanding of what that is like. So is the tutorial system intuitive? Is it effective? Can they learn the mechanics from the tutorial? Is it engaging? Do they feel like they're going through something that is just to learn the mechanics, or do they feel like they're beginning the system? The best games have an integrated tutorial that don't announce that it's a tutorial and feel like it's just the beginning of the game, but it is shown to you in such a way that it mimics what a tutorial would do, gives you the ability to try and to fail without straight up saying, this is the tutorial level 1 necessarily. As well as things like the first few levels. If you are yourself or your trusted friends who played the game 3 or 4 times, this is where you're going to get a sense of, in the flow diagram from before, their skill level will exceed the designed skill level of the first few levels. So their feedback they're going to provide are going to be on the side of boredom rather than within the scope of flow that a tissue playtester might be able to give you at this time, because their skill would be relatively low compared to people who have played the game before. So can a player who's completely new to the game succeed at the first few levels? Are they already boring because they're too easy? What is the difference between players who have played similar games before, players who have played your game before, and players who have never played this kind of game before? Getting a sense of that from the tissue playtester can really help you to determine where the appropriate balance is on those first few levels. And where the balance is on those first few levels will really affect the scope of the balance of the rest of the game. How much harder are you making every successive level based on a baseline? So establishing that baseline is really important. It can, if it's narrative driven, you also get a very good sense of the emotional effect of any early changes. How good is the setting? To what extent can the player regurgitate or reiterate the plot points or the setting points of the story? When you said that, did they just skip it because they didn't care, or did they pay attention to it? That gives you a good sense of how engaging that was. If they play all the way to the end of the game, what did they think of how the game ended? Is it a natural conclusion? Were they waiting for more? Did they feel like the game wrapped up and that they were satisfied with the end of the story? So that's the second circle. At this point, you would be developing a game that has worked for both you and for some outsiders, but some people who are relatively, they're supposed to be part of the eventual audience for the game. The third circle are just acquaintances, others out in the local community. So it seems solid to the second circle. The second circle has stopped finding bugs. We need to, again, increase the sample size, the number of people who are playing your game. And this is where you start looking for people who are outside of those you know immediately. So you want to start giving your game to some strangers, but not just any stranger. You want to identify relevant strangers, for lack of a better term. So one thing to note is we are friends with the friends that we have because they share our tastes, because they potentially share our biases. So the kind of feedback that you get may still be related to the kind of feedback that you got from yourself from that first circle. We need to find people for whom we have not made that connection for some reason. We know they don't necessarily share our tastes, share our biases. So outside of our social circle, we'll start to hear new reactions. And we'll be better at developing for the public as a whole. Where could we find people? Any ideas for this? Where would you go search for people to play your game? Or play test your game? The internet. It's a good place to start.
I don't know, what about like the fair thing they have, like last year where they had the games out, or is that already like
Yeah.
on the stage test?
That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. I put that there and integrate with that for exactly that reason. To get people who are relatively similar to us, who might share some interests in common, but are outside of our social circle. So yeah, people who are our majors or similar, absolutely.
Like Discord or maybe Reddit or something like some.
Yeah, finding a community, an internet-based community. So yeah, lots of Discords out there for game design and development. People who share similar hobbies, those kinds of Discords certainly do exist. Absolutely, yeah.
Especially if your game is like hard, pretty much pretty typecast into a genre or maybe inspired by something.
Yeah, you can find local communities of that particular genre to go play test your game for you. Absolutely. I see it happen all the time on Discords, subreddits, the like. But sticking with in person for the moment, you can also go to local game stores. If people buy games at those stores, they may be interested in testing games as well. Especially if that test involves something like early access to something that they're interested in. I originally wrote these slides over the pandemic. So as you can imagine, there are a couple references to pandemics in here, but community events are especially useful and relevant to find people as well. And the internet is actually the next circle past this. We're really trying to go beyond people who are in our local community and get a sense of that. So the third circle is really places within our local community, acquaintances and acquaintances of acquaintances that we can start looking to for playtesting. And that's especially important if we want to do anything in person that involves being able to sit there and watch them play the game and take notes on their reactions to things. Because if you're doing this over the internet, you're relying on them to type up their experience. And it's much more difficult to actually see their reactions to things. So third circle is still good and useful for getting a good sense of that. And the fourth circle, the internet, the land of awful comments. So anonymity, of course, ensures little to no accountability. So you're putting a lot of trust in people on the internet to actually have done what they say that they've done, and their feedback to not just be very tangential and not related, but it is a large circle of potential playtesters, and you should absolutely be looking to the internet for any large-scale playtesting. The reason that this is the outermost layer of playtesters at this point is because you want it to be in as good of shape as possible before you start spreading it. This is where you can start getting free advertising for your game from people who are very interested in playing it, and you want them to be playing something that is not bug-ridden, that is not half-assed, and doesn't have all the mechanics ready to go and play and test. This should be at a level where you have a very intriguing idea and you want feedback on that idea to make it the best possible state that it could be in. But think of this as an opportunity to really start reaching out to and get some interest in the development of your game. If the game that you're developing is an online game, you need to reach out to the internet eventually anyway, because that's who's going to be consuming it. And a larger scale playtest from this can find a lot of corner case bugs. Because if you're just throwing this out on the internet, you want some way to receive and process bug reports. The best way to do this is within the game itself. Have some kind of bug reporting process. Don't rely on a forum or have people type up their experience. Either be auto-collecting data so that you can see if something goes wrong, be able to collect that data immediately and don't rely on their typed feedback to go identify where that bug happened. Have a bug report feature that allows the user to type up each individual bug, and that way you can classify each bug. You don't have to go through every single forum post and break apart all of the feedback that you're getting into the relevant categories and then identify where those categories are coming from. It's too much to do. If you have an in-game bug report process, that can be where that information is collected in a way that is useful to you, already organized, super useful. Yes, have automated data and user tracking in place. Make sure that you are telling your users that you're collecting that data. We don't like having data collected that we're not told about, but if you are straightforward with your users about this is exactly the kind of data that's being collected for the sole purpose of improving the game and finding bugs, then people are happy with it, as long as you're straightforward. So information on every single play session, and especially ones that are relevant to changes that you think you might want to make. The best information that's out there are not individual pieces of feedback, but aggregate data that comes from a large number of people playing the game. How many people experience this bug? The aggregate of that will help tell you that. You can have that figured out. You can pay your testers using services like Amazon Web Services or anything else at this point. You can basically put a survey out they have to complete in order to get money after they've spent at least some time playing your game. And that is a way of also ensuring that you get good feedback and not just feedback out of someone's best interest. They're giving it to you because you asked them to. How nice of them. You actually pay them for the good feedback, and that can be very useful if you have the money. That can get very expensive very quickly. So this should be the last step once you've fixed everything you can with everything else, just to make sure that there aren't other large-scale issues to consider before releasing. So what different kinds of playtesting can we use? First one is informal individual testing. This is what happens when you casually show the game to someone and have them play it. Then based on how they experience the game, you collect data and feedback based on their play session. There is formal group testing where you will, it's like an academic study. You will have multiple people playing the game at a time, and you will have people collecting the data on that, and it's very prescribed. It's not just, hey, can you come over and play my game? What do you think? It's very formal in that you're giving them surveys, you're asking them targeted questions about game systems that you are unsure about, and you ask them that, they give you feedback in a formal setting. Sometimes this can be paid, sometimes this can be free, if you can find people who will just donate their time. Formal individual testing. This is a very focused analysis of a single person's first playthrough of the game. So this can be either in person or remote, but you're recording the entire session of them playing the game and really taking apart their playthrough and trying to assign either tags or levels of interest. You can figure out a lot from your game from analyzing this single playthrough. And then, of course, online playtesting. This is where you give your game to an arbitrary number of people and rely on aggregate data to give you feedback, because there's no way that you have the manpower to go through and analyze all of that feedback. So you want to have tools in place to gather that data. A little bit more detail on these 4 methods of playtesting. Informal individual testing. It's basically asking a friend if they'd mind trying out your game. Very useful early in development when the feedback from an individual player can tell you a lot about your game. If you've made a large scale change to your game, it's also great for getting initial feedback to a new system that you've developed or when you've greatly changed a system. When you're testing them, you want to make sure, don't tell them very much about the game. Let them naturally play the game as they want to and record what they do and how they see the game. This tells you how intuitive your mechanics are. If you're giving them hints, if you're giving them significant prodding of what happened, did you look behind that tree? Did you? It feels like you're holding their hand too much. Check and see if they do it and if they don't. And only if they ask you a question should you consider answering the question. But even then, if they ask, did I miss anything? You should think thoroughly before answering that question. Because a first-time playtester of your game, first-time player of your game will not have you there to answer a similar question. So that can help you figure out how intuitive your hidden areas are, something like that. Small internet groups counting for the third circle? Yeah, that's true. A small Discord of interested people? Sure. Doing the informal individual testing like this lets you know if you're hitting your minimum level of instruction that you need to guide people to something. So if you expect most people to find something that is hidden, you can determine whether the level of information on that is present in the game, or whether a mechanic is intuitive enough from the instruction that is given. If you need to provide more tutorial assistance in order to have players reach a particular benchmark of progress within the tutorial. So yeah, don't lead the player. If you're asking even leading questions on this, you can bias your playtester in ways that you don't necessarily think are biasing, but it will very much affect the way that they play the game. So some kinds of biasing questions that you might ask. Did you notice the health pickups? Leading question. Tells the player, one, they exist. Two, they're important to pick up or use, which otherwise they might have had to figure out for themselves. And it may change how they work, how they think, how they behave for the entire rest of their playthrough based on something that you told them. And that level of bias doesn't give you as good information about your game as you otherwise would. It impedes on their freedom of choice. If they feel watched or judged, that's something that if you're just there, maybe they think they're not paying very much attention, but as soon as you're engaging with their playtest, now they feel watched. And someone who feels watched acts differently than someone who does not feel watched. So yeah, when the game is released, you won't be there to help new players. So try to emulate that environment when you have this informal individual testing. Yeah.
And I think with the health pack is like also extra important because something that important should be very obvious, right? So they're not noticed.
Right. That's a big piece of information for you. That how long does it take them in this playthrough to take these health pickups seriously?
Yeah.
Maybe we need an additional piece of the tutorial that has you take damage, forces you to go find a health pickup, and tells you how to use it. Maybe that's needed. Anything else? Yeah.
Kind of, how would you know that it's needed if they don't tell you that, like in this case, how would you know if they didn't pick up the health pickups in this example?
Or you have to have data on that. But yeah, if you're just a very excited developer, like you're gonna need these later for the boss fight. Make sure you pick these up.
Well, in this scenario, you're like watching.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the informal individual testing, it's individual. You're with one other person playing the game. And yeah, you want to avoid interjecting your experience or your thoughts as the developer into their experience wherever possible. Let them play naturally. And if what they're playing naturally doesn't adhere to what you, the developer, think will be successful, then that's information for you, not something that you should be telling. Other things, don't argue with them, regardless of who they are or how much their opinion differs from what you would hope. Then it's not worth engaging with them on this. That's going to bias them. and it's not gonna make them not wanna come back and test again. Don't make excuses, oh yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at this yet, or I haven't fully fleshed this out. I understand that this isn't, you're already biasing them, they don't know that information yet, unless they're immediately giving you the feedback, this doesn't feel very fleshed out. Take that as a data point, try not to counterpoint that or make an excuse for why, yeah.
Except for when they suck. I'm just kidding. But in Elden Ring Night Rain, they did a network test, right?
Yeah,
And the number one kind of comment from the community was it's too hard. And FromSoft looks at them and they're like, that's the whole point. No,
yeah,
you're not getting that.
yeah.
But they could have argued about it, but they just like, yeah.
Yeah,
it's not
that's
very
the
good.
point of this game, is for you to iterate and get better until you can succeed at this. Yeah, so listen to all feedback, but the best feedback that you will receive is feedback that you disagree with. Because it leads to growth and development of your game that you otherwise wouldn't see. You don't have to pander to every single experience, but if 5 out of 6 playtesters are telling you something and you very much don't agree with it, that's still important information for you to consider. 5 out of 6 people didn't like this. What does your game look like if you do pander to them? Is it a better overall? Can you make that change and take back something else that creates a new environment that might be one that is more accessible to them, but also upholds your standards of difficulty? So yeah, try not to defend your game or your decisions making the game. Just make sure that you note that all opinions are valid and you are trying to make the best decisions that you can for people as a whole within your game. So all feedback is useful, even if it doesn't lead to direct change in your game. It is data. It is something that you should be aware of, take into consideration. Take significant notes on this. So notebook or text file, notes on any feedback. Underline it or highlight it if it's something you didn't expect or want to hear. And that will help you to be able to go back and gather feedback that is different from what you expected. Yeah.
And also with Elden Ring again, when the DLT came out, the final boss was so hard, so they had veteran players saying this is too hard, and that's when they started to realize like, oh, our veteran players are saying this is too hard.
Yeah, you need some way of
And they changed it and made it easier, well, more fair.
determining where your feedback is coming from. Once you're in those larger circles and getting feedback, it's worth figuring out veteran, non-veteran, how much playtime do you have, how much experience do you have, how good are you at this game during that feedback, because it can very much, if you break your user groups down into those groups, you can see that it's actually balanced, even though most people say this is too hard. Yeah. Bring those notes together, collate them, and look for any statements that you hear multiple times. That's especially valid feedback. Group feedback together in groups so that you can analyze it later. And if only one or just a few playtesters are mentioning something, maybe it's not a very big deal because it's not hugely popular feedback. Next one we're looking at, formal group testing. This used to be the way that large studios primarily tested their games. And so it feels very much like a research study. People are invited into a lab environment to play the game. Each person is given an individual computer or console or phone to play the game. And they're given just a little instruction, enough to launch and begin the game. And then they begin playing. The entire session is recorded. And after about 30 minutes, playtesters are stopped. There's no back and forth, with the exception of anyone who has questions. Like you can raise your hand and ask a question, and then someone can come and answer that question if it is something that they should answer. So, which is this button? What does this button do? Something that maybe a follow-up question could be, where would you be looking to figure that out? Is there a menu that some leading questions that would help them to know where to look to find that information within the game? After they've played the game for however long they said it is, they fill out a post-game survey. And the most important thing about surveys is to avoid biased questions in your surveys because biased questions lead to biased answers. And I find that computer scientists in general are terrible at writing survey questions. So we should talk about, at some point, how to write non-leading questions in surveys, because it doesn't take very much to change how someone responds to a survey question. It really doesn't. A single word, or the order of things, or the number and type of responses, mostly being positive with only a couple negative possible responses. All of that is biasing in some regard. Oftentimes there are interviews as well that allow for not just filling out information, but actually getting real live responses that you can gather data on the emotion behind those responses. So it's very good for getting feedback from multiple people. And you can get answers to really important questions deep in the detail of your game. Here are some example survey questions. Describe your 3 favorite and least favorite aspects of the game. Biased or not biased?
Not biased.
This is a not biased question. We're not leading them, telling them what their favorite or least favorite should be. We're not saying your 3 favorite and 1 least favorite aspect. We're keeping it the same, saying that we're interested in just all of your feedback, but we kind of want to rank what were your favorite and least favorite aspects of the game. We're not being biased here at all, in my opinion. We could provide the playtester with a series of images from the game and then ask them, how did you feel at this point in the game? And we could then pick parts in the game where there are choices. There's a branch, there is a difficult boss, and it just, the visual brings back the memory of what it was like to be engaging with that visual moment in the game. And images are much better than words for describing things like locations. It brings back memory better than text. How did you feel about the main character or characters? This is much better than what did you like about the main character? Because then you're already saying something like, you should have liked the main character. And you're not going to get the negative response that you would otherwise about the main character. Did your feelings about the characters change over the course of the game? Again, you're not saying, how did your feelings about the characters change over the course of the game? That would imply that your feelings changed over the course of the game. You'd be leading them down the path of figuring that out or addressing that point. If you leave it as kind of a yes, no, and follow it up, if they say, yes, my feelings did change, now you can say how. Can you explain that in more detail? You can ask things like, how much would you pay for this game? As soon as you put a dollar amount in there, you're biasing them a little bit. Would you pay $50 for this game? Now there's already something in their mind. If you follow that up with, well, then how much would you pay for the game? They're already thinking $50 is the baseline. So you've already biased them. If you first get a response, how much would you pay for this game? About $20. Then you can follow it up with, how likely would you be to pay $25 for this game? How likely would you be to pay? And you can get a sense of how that cost scales off from there. What were the 3 most confusing things about the game? This lets them come to you with what those confusing aspects are. If you say, did you find this particular thing to be confusing? Even then, they're going to look for reasons why it was confusing. So let them come to you with what was confusing, and then you can prod them more. What about that was confusing to you? Because they've come to you saying it was confusing. So wherever possible, let the responder initiate the information and then follow up on that information rather than digging for specific information out of your responder. So, biased versions of these questions. What do we think? Anyone have an example of how you could further bias? We did this a little bit as we went through, but I did a pretty poor job of knowing this was coming. But in general, we talked about kind of a little bit of what makes a survey question leading, but yeah, in general, I would say it's when you are prodding the responder for something. You're supplying some information that you expect the responder to agree with or disagree with to bring something to you. And if you are going to ask an agree or disagree type of question, then make sure that the wording of the rest of it is as neutral as possible and the responses are perfectly mirrored in agreement and disagreement. Yeah.
I think it also has a lot to do with like setting up a baseline. So if you're like, you know, how do you like the main character? You're like setting up the baseline that you should like them almost.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
even the first one seems like even though it like equalizes two different baselines, like there are 3 things you should like and there are 3 things you should dislike. Even the fact that there might be 3 things that you like and dislike is a little bit of a baseline, but it's obviously balanced. You know?
Yeah, you could addend each one of those with how much did you like or did like a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. How much did you like this favorite thing? And you get a sense of, well, this person actually disliked more than they liked in this game because they rated the dislike higher than the like in those 3 favorite and least favorite aspects. But again, you're not providing them with that information. Statement online says, my favorite question as a creative in general, if you had the skills and authority, what thing or things would you change right now and why? That's pretty good. It's not very biased. It doesn't lead them to say what they would change. It lets their experience come forward and inform you about that. But the more you care about very particular feedback, there are ways to word those questions in similar ways. In order to do things like formal group testing, you want to make sure that all of your playtesters receive exactly the same experience, and that way they are biased for their responses based off of the information that was given to them before or during their play session. So scripts that you write for this, things like, what should the people who are delivering this say to the playtesters in order to set up the game? What are the instructions that we give them? They should be the same. That way it's not going to be confusing to some and not confusing to some others based on differences in the instructions that they were given. We should focus on standardizing how investigators react during the playtest. Are they answering questions? If so, how are they addressing those questions? What should be addressed? What should not? So should they ask questions to see if the playtester does something? If the playtester looks interested, should they ask questions about that in the moment? If they do something unusual that was not expected, should we ask questions about why they did that? If you wait until the very end of the playtest, if you point out when you were at this point and you did this thing, they may not remember, or they may hallucinate why they did something because now they have the context of the rest of their gameplay session. Yeah.
In that case, it might be good practice to record for their sections, like screen cap, whatever they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like asking for questions during a lecture or waiting until the end of the lecture to ask questions. Once you ask for questions at the end of the lecture, you get the rest of the context of the lecture. But if I'm curious about in the moment what is not clear, then I ask for questions along the way. And when something is not clear, I get the chance to clarify it in the middle before I lose people for the rest of the lecture. It's very similar in this.
But doesn't that run the risk of of introducing bias?
It does. But you want to be on the same page with all of your investigators. You don't want one investigator interjecting in a way that the other investigators don't. You want to be on the same page of the amount of bias that you're looking for. If you allow for something like, we want to understand why players are doing what they're doing. That's very important to our play test right now. So rather than waiting until the end, we will deal with the bias of talking to them in the moment to better understand why they're doing what they're doing. But again, everyone should be on the same page with that.
So, in my understanding, this is a group of people playing the game. What if one player biases another player?
It should all be separate. This
Okay,
group
separate.
testing here, it's Yeah, everyone is playing the game, but I think it's individualized in, you're bringing 6 people in, but they're each 6 individually playing the game differently.
Okay,
But if they're playing it together, then yes, you definitely want to, if it's a multiplayer oriented game and you're bringing in people to play together in some sense, then you should absolutely be looking at the engagements with other players during that playtest. Yeah. Be on the same page about whether to provide hints during gameplay. Think through, yeah.
Question about R2, are we gonna be doing, formal testing throughout the 4 week
No.
or 5 weeks? Right?
There's
Just
no
at the
time.
end?
There's no time really to guarantee that testing is happening. My recommendation is that you do some form of testing within the development, but when you only have 4 weeks for this, you have to be very aware of time. Time that you spend iterating and getting feedback is time that you're not spending developing features and getting something working. So there's a big trade-off when you're very limited in time. So you'll have to prioritize. This is from the perspective of you have a little bit more time than you're going to have in part 2 of this class. That said, there's still some value in getting feedback, but getting feedback from members of this class that might be reviewing your game is probably a no. You don't want to bias people before they sit down and review your game.
But that's kind of the point of like the final submission where everyone goes and looks at each other's games.
Yeah.
Because like you're not trying to, you're not gonna submit a fully, completely, utterly perfect game.
Of course, yeah. So it's expected that there are going to be some bugs and some holes, but you want to minimize those as much as possible. But if you spend a ton of time making sure that the prototype is picture perfect, clean, bug free, then all you have at the end of 4 weeks is a prototype. There's a middle ground there between some things, as long as they're not game breaking, are okay, as long as it means that we can expand and get a couple of other features working within the game to make it feel a little bit better, a little bit more complete. So yeah, think about the environment during the playtest. How long should the playtester be allowed to play before you cut them off? Everyone should be given the same amount of time and or as much time as needed to get to a particular point. But you should still cut that off somehow. There will be some player who sits in the very early area of a game and trying to figure out what is the maximum level. Grinding slimes in the first level. Someone will try to do that and they will keep you there for weeks while they try to figure out what the max level of your game is, knowing that this playtest will come to an end. So cap them at some time period, even if they don't get where you want. But that's a good piece of data that this player really, really, really doesn't want to progress with things and wants to see the limitation of how prepared can I be? How does grinding feel at this point in this game?
Are the playtesters the kind?
Probably not.
That might bias.
It definitely would bias them. But if they're curious about that and they start playing the game the way that they want to play the game, which is I'm not going to progress things until I feel like I'm not making any statistical progress. Maybe what that tells you is that your level curve is too steep. I guess too flat. It's probably flat in the regard that each level doesn't increase the requirements of the next level by enough that they feel like that grinding is still getting them somewhere deep into the play session, where the game should push them to go to the next zone in some capacity. That's a developer decision. How should you handle that? And if your players are sitting in that first area for too long, that's good feedback. What survey questions should be asked once the playtest is finished? And all of this helps remove bias from your data, because every person who's coming into the game is being treated to this playtest, being treated exactly the same way. You get exactly the same data. The only differences are the people themselves with respect to how they interact with your game. That's what you want to isolate. The formal investigators, the people who sit down and collect this data, should not be part of your development team, because the team members are already biased. If you can bring in someone else to do that investigation, you give them the script. Even if the investigators know next to nothing about your game, that's probably a good thing. They can't bias the playtesters. So members of your team already know how to play, know all the secret locations, know all the plot twists. everything that's fun or interesting about your game. They also have an emotional investment in people liking the game. So you're more likely to just bias people out of an emotional investment in the product that you've created. And bias can absolutely be unintentional, and we should be aware of our own unintentional bias. An intelligent person recognizes the limitations of their intentional and unintentional bias and tries actively to minimize their unintentional bias. No intelligent person I've ever met has said, I don't unintentionally bias anyone. That's silly. Of course we all unintentionally bias each other. The goal should be to minimize that. Maximize the chance we can reduce it to zero without the expectation that we can, because that's ridiculous. When you find good investigators, keep working with them, keep their contact information. The investigator can figure out the progress of the game itself and provide some kind of secondhand data on your game and on the playtesters. If they've noticed changes in the playtesters over time, then the investigator can help keep up with that data. And this is very good for giving high-level feedback to developers. We are almost to the end of this. We'll come back tomorrow and handle it. Is there a question? A comment? All right. We'll come back tomorrow and do a bit more, where we will dive into some formal individual testing. See you tomorrow for that.